Okay, we're going to start. Hello and welcome to the Psychology of Global Crisis and the third keynote of the day. I would like to especially welcome everyone to this session on crisis and the social bond. I'm Antonia Larraín from Universidad Alberto Hurtado, Chile, and I will be the moderator of this keynote session. I'm honored to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Kathya Araujo. Kathya has a doctorate in American Studies, and she is a professor and researcher at the Institute for Advanced Studies of Universidad de Santiago de Chile. She is director of the Center Millennium for the Study of Authority and Power Asymmetries that involves an interdisciplinary group of researchers from different Chilean and international universities and research centers. She has been a visiting professor at different international universities as Free University in Berlin, and École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales du Paris. She has developed her work funded by different agencies as Ford Foundation, Humboldt Foundation, CONICET Chile, among many others. Her main research is on sociology of norms, individuation and subjective configurations, social theory, and psychoanalysis. She has published several books and research articles, and today she will present her thoughts on in the conference titled, Is There Anything Under the Sun? Crisis, Individuals, and the Social Bond. So it is a great honor and pleasure to have her here in this conference, and I'm very much looking forward to Kathya's talk. So I leave you with her.
So good morning from Santiago de Chile, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation, and especially Antonia Larraín. I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation, so if you just give me a second, I'll get this ready. Okay, so my aim in this talk is twofold. First, I intend to situate the novelty of the crisis unfolded by the pandemic and establish the challenges that this entails, especially for social sciences and critical thinking. Second, I hoped to contribute to these challenges by discussing how this crisis calls into question some premises underlying the study of the social bond, and I will especially review three. First, the idea that the national scale is not only unimportant, but deserves to be mistrusted. Second, the conception of the individual as a threat. And third, the equivalence often attributed to social regulation and domination. So let's begin with the question about the novelty. Is there anything new under the sun? Well, my answer is no and yes. The sentence, "there is nothing new under the sun," warns us that there are some fundamental existential issues that we must deal with as human beings permanently. Many have considered this phrase not only pessimistic, but also reductive. It is true, but it has the virtue of guarding us from an extremely widespread trend in our time, that of seeing novelty in everything that appears under the sun. This is not the first pandemic, nor is it the deadliest. It is worth remembering that the plague, also called Black Death, was a permanent companion in Europe until early 19th century. The existential challenges the COVID-19 poses are not new. Delumeau, the very well-known French historian, has masterfully recounted in his book La Peur en Occident the ways the plague gives place to a world of forced solitude with an enormous difficulty in thinking about the future, a world of Russian escapes from the city of closure and aggression against foreigners, a world of expanded anxiety and uncontrolled fears, a landscape in which death appears in all its raw threat. This is a story whose resonance are evident today. Same silences, same anxiety, same closure, same fear, same extended presence of death in our everyday lives. However, the permanence of fundamental existential questions, such as the enigma of death or the need for security, cannot lead to forget that they are historically transformed. They are framed in very different material and symbolic worlds. So yes, there is not something new under the sun. What is then the novelty? Of course, there are many factors which could be mentioned, but there's one aspect that seems essential to me. This pandemic is not only a health issue, it appears at the same time to us as a symptom. It occurs in the context of a pluralization of signs that seem to warn us that we are entering a moment of historical transition, that we are not facing a specific crisis, but a structural crisis. A structural crisis means that the basic responses or modalities that we had found to maintain a certain balance or order of things have begun to swing, showing their inadequacy and fragility. A time where once a binding and relatively stabilizing solution now stops working. Two great streams that join to this destabilization are at work. On the one hand, the extension of a social unrest that already has forms of expression in many parts of the world through protests and mobilizations with greater or lesser degrees of violence, but with violence. On the other hand, the already visible pervasive consequences of the relationship that our civilization has developed with nature. From this perspective, the fundamental challenge is not just the pandemic, but the ongoing process of which this is a symptom of. More than a specific and isolated event, it is perhaps the first visible and recognizable of a series of events that will come and that will end up shaping the world in which we will have to live. A world, as Beck said, of global threats, but from which we do not know for sure where it may lead. But if it is impossible to predict what it is to come, it is essential to analytically accompany this process. Now, accompanying this transition demands a series of challenges for social scientists and especially for critical thinking. Perhaps one of the most important of these challenges for us is to call into questions some premises of our work, to abandon certainties and stay open to the new. So, to be coherent, in what follows, I will attempt to make a contribution to these challenges by discussing how what we are experiencing with the pandemic questions some conceptions currently at work in my field of study. I am a social scientist and a psychoanalyst, and I have been working for a long time now on how the social bond is impacted by structural factors and individuation processes. Let me just say short what I understand by the study of the social bond. The study of the social bond is the study of the specific historical ways relationships between individuals in a society are shaped, ways which give a relative organicity and sustainability to the social world. These studies usually take into account three main components, not only, but there are three main of these components. One, the construction of the common. 2, the relationship between the individual and the collective, and the problem of social regulation. So this is the perspective, it is from this perspective that I depart from. And so in what follows, I will review 3 notions that are widespread in the social sciences, as I said, and especially in critical thinking, that our current predicament suggests we need to re-examine. First, regarding the problem of the construction of the common, the idea that the national scale is not only unimportant, but deserves to be mistrusted. Second, regarding the relationship between the individual and the collective, the conception of the individual and individualism as a threat. Third, regarding the issue of social regulation, the equivalence often attributed to social regulation and domination. So first, the construction of the common, the nation, and the national. In recent decades, much of the discussion in the social and human sciences has underlined the globalized dimension of the world. It has been proposed that the understandings of social phenomena, social threats, and social conflicts should take that scale. Furthermore, many have trusted that this global scale would provide new form of solidarity and justice. Simultaneously, widespread mistrust was developed towards the nation and the national scale. Nevertheless, this crisis shows with crude transparency the centrality of the nation and the national scale. Given the magnitude of the threat that we face, a global and articulated response would be reasonable, and we should expect it. But the truth is that events end up sharpening the perception of the deeply national character of social life. This centrality is, of course, not new for the social sciences. Empirical research, as empirical research continues to show, the most relevant everyday experiences that individuals make are mainly at the national scale. Their most profound sense of dependence is linked to the national level. But this fact has not been enough taken into account by theory. So COVID-19 helped us, empirical researchers, to unveil the deep and radical importance of the national. Theory wasn't taken into account, not enough. Of course, this experience in the time of COVID-19 have to do with the role that the states play in confronting this crisis. The fate of populations in different countries depends on them, their resources, their current responsibility, but also their previous actions. The death of many will have to be made on account of the states' paths on these states' past and present decisions. But for the moment, as is usually the case in which survival seems to be at stake, it is toward the nation, toward the state, that the redemptive and saving hopes of the population are directed. But this strengthening of the national level is also related, and above all, to the strategies to approach the crisis. Border closures become widespread. In many cases, the use of the nation and nationalist sentiments has been the main tool to appeal to citizens. In addition, an ominous competition has been established between nations, one defined by the number of deaths and flattering of transmission curves. The presuppositions about the character traits of national cultures have played an extremely important role in defining how to manage the crisis. The confidence in their discipline makes it possible for the Japanese to be in public space at a time when other countries were obligatorily confining cities and populations. The assumption of the transgressive character of inhabitants of in Peru defined and made admissible a very long and a way too early mandatory quarantine in the whole country. In short, at a time of global crisis like this, the social bond that is always sustained in an imaginary of the common is redirected with more impetus than before to find its materials to the queries of the nation. Of course, the risks are various. A widespread feeling of distrust to the foreign has become stronger. The explicit competition between nations allows conducts worthy of a story of pirates or gangsters. Countries stopping planes and confiscating medical material, etc., etc. But it doesn't help to react by demonizing the national or evading it through an elusive game that goes from the global to the local. It does not help because it leaves the social sciences and critical thinking out of tune with the experience, imaginaries, and conceptions of the vast majority of the population. This is an error that is paid dearly if we think how the nation keeps being successfully used by the extreme right-wing parties and movements around the world. We do need to take a closer look to the national level. The challenges are not few. Because of time, I limit myself to mention only one. How, at the same time as we recognize the crucial importance of the national level in people's life and their ordinary and daily struggles, we prevent the narrowing of the idea of the common. So now to the individual and the collective, and the individual as a threat. Perhaps one of the most frequent appeals in this time of pandemic is the question of individual responsibility. The importance of the individual as a basis for the solution of this crisis seems to be evident to everyone. Thus, appeal is made towards the moral dimension of the individual, to his ability to moderate his freedom by virtue of his responsibilities towards the collective. This pandemic, as few events before, has highlighted the degree to which the process of individualization have expanded. I mean by process of individualization, the fact that the individual is now placed as the basis of the idea of society. But at the same time, the process of individualization refers to the deepening of the mandate for the cultivation of individualities. So individualization processes have radicalized in regions of the world where it has a long history, such as in the Central Western world. But they have also expanded in many regions of the world, like Latin America, ceasing to be a purely Central Western matter. Of course, in this journey, the idea of the individual and the features of individualization have taken different meanings and different valorizations depending on the regions and specific societies. Nevertheless, and without distinction, this crisis has revealed the extent in which These processes of the individualization have transformed the way of facing collective problems. The effects of individualization create new conditions on the possible and efficient ways of appealing to people and their collective commitment. Hence, to recall this phenomenon of individualization when approaching the social bond is of extreme urgency. This is the case for Latin America. This is a region in which the elites have historically blurred the individual. Guardianship forms in the relations with the people, subtracting, therefore, individual autonomy from the population. In such a context, obviously, individualization is a main factor of destabilization of traditional forms of conceiving the social bond. Nevertheless, this remains as a very limited area of research. A main reason for this neglection, and this is not only the case in Latin America, is the pervasive action of a premise. The individual has often been conceived, even or perhaps especially by critical thinking, as a threat. This has been expressed in the associations between individual egoism, individual transgression, individual anti-collective, individual anti-solidarity, or in its most contemporary version, the individual as a pure expression of a neoliberal subjectivity. Through these associations, what has been underlined is the distance between individualized individuals and the idea of the common. My point here, excuse me. My point here is that holding on to these conceptions entails serious difficulties. It impedes grasping what this crisis, and those that will come for sure, poses as a challenge, what this crisis poses as a challenge. That is, how to face situations that require high degrees of collective coordination and solidarity in a world of strong individualization. We need to study the relationship between individual and the collective, but we have to do it without departing from a conception of the individual and individualism as a threat. Of course, a reading that links the individual to selfishness or as a mirage that sustains mechanisms of domination is not completely wrong. We can find enough examples in the development of this pandemic. On the one hand, the food hoarding has been a massive and widespread reaction. On the other hand, the consolidation of individual responsabilization, as discussed by Bauman, has allowed to bear the responsibility of the political decisions and of structural effects. This reading of individual as a threat is therefore not wrong, but totally wrong, but is insufficient. An important part of the population has restricted the use of public spaces even without being obliged to do so. Many who are strongly individualized individuals have undergone very important resignations in order to protect others. In short, an overcritical reading of the individual prevents us from seeing that we are facing irreversible processes of individualization and singularization, and then they imply a deep rearticulation of the relationship of the individual to the collective. It makes us see ordinary people as enemies, being that it is they who are in the making of the world today and the one to come. The challenge that this crisis presents us is clear, although perhaps not simple. How to think in the future of a strong individualized individual who is the foundation of the collective? How may we not forget that this is precisely this individual, the same that critical thinking has looked upon with suspicion, the skeleton and the very heart of the social world? So now 3, social regulation and domination. In the COVID-19 crisis, influencing the behavior of the population has been presented as one of the most relevant strategies. Even if the metaphor of war used by various presidents has been questioned, and with good reasons, the truth is there are relevant similes with moments of war and other catastrophic events. In such moments, the need for the generalized mobilization of the population and changing its behaviors and habits in an abrupt and accelerated manner becomes urgent. These kind of situations underscore the importance of social regulation, authority, leadership, and the ability to guide the population's behavior. The issue of obedience and compliance with norms is placed at times like this at the center of strategic building. Hence, the tension between freedom and security is renewed. The importance of survival restructures the hierarchy of these values, freedom and security. It becomes hard to discern the boundaries between what can be considered undue control and what as an acceptable control by virtue of the common good or the survival of the collective. This crisis, but also the horizon of facing other catastrophic situations in the future, reveals another challenge for social sciences and critical thinking. Both social sciences and critical thinking have been prolific in studying and discussing the risks of control and the forms of domination that this entails. But they have been much less productive in providing clues on how to solve what are the boundaries of acceptable social regulation. This means defining how is it possible to conceive social regulation today in an acceptable way, a way that takes into account our values and normative principles such as freedom, autonomy, or intimacy. The association between social regulation and domination has avoided a serious discussion of the former. We have not discussed enough how to solve problems of social coordination or social reproduction in a complex, individualistic, horizontal, and mistrustful world. In the absence of a reflection on how to make social regulation possible and acceptable, the confusion is greater. Let me give you an example. The crisis has allowed us to see with transparency the conflict between 3 main ways of conceiving how the obedience of the population can be obtained. First, factual control strategies. In these cases, the question of the relational character of power is veiled behind the cold efficiency of platforms, apps, or figures. Second, relational strategies is strongly based on intersubjective models. These appeal to a reflective and strongly argumentative dimension, but are in final terms supported by a repressive and punitive component, a successful repressive and punitive component. Thirdly, forms of exercise of authority based explicitly on punitive models that make coercion their main support. So, these three main ways of getting obedience. Now, the most critical and progressive positions, without much surprise, given the lack of reflection on the point, have ended up defending disorderly one position or the other, one strategy or the other. Many ended up supporting positions which contradicted ideas or principles they had been defending with greater energy only a few months ago. Some ended up promoting a model of repressive and punitive control, a model that they had been denouncing. So the risk of not taking into account the problem of social regulation seriously are enormous. They are, of course, those of maintaining all repressive and totalitarian forms of regulation assurance, those of naively collaborating with the drift to factual or imposition of forms of imposition of power and control, but also those of defending freedom without taking into account the problem of how to solve social coordination or the limits that imposes social life in complex societies. It is not an easy matter, of course. Its difficulty makes it one of the most important challenges this crisis reveals. For this reason, social scientists and critical thinking need to endorse a deep, self-critical and radical reflection on how to resolve the tension between freedom and control, how to tackle the ill-famed but indispensable question of social regulation without reducing it to domination. To sum up what I have said, so there is something new under the sun. There is something new under the sun. And that is that we are facing a historical transition. COVID-19 is a symptom of the processes that we are on. For social scientists and critical thinking, this entails the challenge to accompany this process, putting into question premises underlying our approaches. I have attempted to do so in the field of study of the social bond. I have suggested that this transition demands us to revise at least three widespread ideas. Firstly, the mistrust in the national scale. Secondly, the conception of the individual and individualism as a threat. Thirdly, the association between domination and social regulation. So having arrived at the end of, forgot this slide. So having arrived at the end of my presentation, I would like to recall that history is the result of the efforts and disputes to give new meaning and direction to events. Being part of these efforts and disputes in moments of this deep transformation, such as the one we live in, requires humility to accept our blind spots, courage to face the trials we must confront, and strength to overcome them. Social sciences, as well as critical thinking, need to recognize at this moment of crisis and transition that they are deeply concerned by these requirements of humility, courage, and strength. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kathya, very much for your great talk and critical thoughts. I very much like your invitation to think critically, precisely to critical theorists. Before I go on, I just want to remind you that you can post your questions in our Q&A section, and I will read them for Kathya. So please go on. And as I am moderating, I have the opportunity to make you the first questions. I have many questions, but maybe I will go for in order. Regarding this idea of symptom, you say COVID is a symptom, and I was wondering why a symptom, because symptom has to do with, well, an expression that something else is going on and helps us to understanding what is going on, but also it says something about it gives the idea that COVID is a symptom of another illness that we need to understand, and so on. So I was wondering why symptom, because anyway, yeah, you can say that of course COVID-19 and this crisis is intertwined or with other crises, and establishes links and articulations with a specific crisis that were there already. I mean, the crisis you mentioned, political, climate change, but of course many others, gender, crisis of trust. So why a symptom? Why not to think that it's just like another crisis that is going to be articulated in complex and very singular ways, depending where you are, with other undergoing crises? Because it seems to me, it's like when I was hearing you, it's like, yeah, it resonates me with the idea of well, COVID-19 was sent to us to tell us that our society is ill, and so blah, 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 blah. So that is my first question.
Well, no, it was not my intention to treat COVID-19 as the plague, like punishment from God. The idea, but yeah, I'm using this idea of a symptom, and I said we should see it as a symptom also, because I think we have to. This is a sanitary problem, this is a health issue, but it's not only a health issue. So we should treat it as a symptom of something going on. I think what we are facing could not have been possible in a world that is not globalized as ours. It could have been not been possible in a world that is so interconnected as ours. In a world that is not has not developed such faith to science as ours, of course. So I'm not saying it is only a symptom. It has there is something. The real is there, using like Lacanian concepts. The real of the pandemic must be respected, but we should, when we think about this from the social sciences and not only from medical or biological perspective, we have to think of this as an expression of and what this expression tells us about what is going on. And I think what is going on, we cannot just look at the pandemic. We have to look to the whole, to what is behind the pandemic, to what the pandemic shows us has to do with other processes that are going on. And I really think we are in a moment of historical transition. And maybe this is one of the series of events that will come. Many are saying that this is just one of the most visible and recognizable events of a series that will come. Everybody is saying that we are waiting for them. So we have to look to it from the social sciences. So I started by saying I'm seeing it from social science and critical thinking. And I just wanted to see it as a symptom also of what we have to revise, to re-examine, which are the tasks that this COVID COVID-19 experience, pandemic, shows us which are the tasks we have in the future, because it is only a symptom of something that is going on. It's not going to be the only event we're going to face. Maybe this is the most global, but there are a lot of things going already on in the world. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but no, I'm not taking. It has a register. There is the register of the real, and that is a health problem. That is a sanitary problem. But from the social sciences, it has another. We have to see it from another perspective.
But then this COVID-19, you say, well, of course, it's expressing our reality. So we need to look at the pandemic as performing our reality. But at the same time, because that image is like a passive image of the pandemic. It's just an expression. But at the same time, the pandemic is doing something new, isn't it?
Of course, yes, of course. It's not only a symptom. It's not only but symptoms are active too. You know, like if you have a symptom changes your life. Yeah. And I mean, it's not only health; it's mental symptoms too. If you have a symptom, like if you have fear of going out of your house, that will change your world, and that will change your perceptions, and that change the way you are going to organize your image, the image of the world. So it's both it has both sides. But I do think symptoms are not only passive, but are also active. They also change the world. They're not only expressions, but they change worlds.
And yeah, and then I have another question regarding the next step of your talk, regarding the idea of the construction of the common and the nation. I like very much the attention you place in the idea of the nation, and the call to take the nation seriously as critical theorists. But I was wondering, why the notion of construction of the common? Because in a way, the national and nations are now being performed through the pandemic. I'm not sure if they are constructed, but they are being performed in a way. So why to say the construction of the common?
Well, because I'm talking about the social bond. And when you study the social bond, you know, this relationship between individuals, a very important aspect of the social bond has to do that we have to have an idea of what is common to us, which will keep us linked, related to one another. It is necessary to keep the social bond, to build the social bond to an idea, even if it's a rudimentary idea, even if it's a very slight idea. We need an idea of the common, and in the last time, critical thinking has not paid attention to the fact that this scale, the nation, gives a lot of material, gives material to the construction of what we think that is common. That is why I said that we that are empirical researchers, I am an empirical researcher and I do some theory too, but I am an empirical researcher, and for empirical researchers or for people that work with people, no, every day, clinic, for us it's clear that the nation, the national is always there. This the most important experience people have. They conduct themselves in everyday life because they have experience at this level, and they learn how to, it's not cognitive learning always, but they learn how to deal with situations, how to present themselves through these experiences. And these experiences are mostly in this national level, in this national scale. And nation is still there as a material of this idea of the common. But in the last decade, critical thinking has been very mistrustful about the idea of the nation. And so the nation, because of these discussions that came in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the nation was thought was related to subjection, domination, and a lot of negative things. But when you don't take into account this scale, then you're losing something which is very relevant for people. And when you lose that, then you lose the possibility to explain what is going on in social life and to do a critical analysis of social reality. And so what I'm just saying is that COVID-19 helped us unveil that. We know that empirical researchers, normally we do that, but theory has not taken that into account as it should. And critical thinking has been posing that nation is dangerous, nation, etc. So that what I'm saying is we're leaving that to other, like this is a fact that is happening, constantly working in how the way social life takes and everything, and we're living that. And then the use of the nation has been left for some groups, radicalized groups, like some right-wing parties or ultra right-wing parties or ultra-radical right-wing parties or movements. And I think that this is very complicated, and it will get worse because if things keep on going, like when I think pandemic is one of these events that maybe they will come, very catastrophic events that will come because of the climate change, because the economic model and the social model is coming to a dead end, then we will have to face really big structural crisis. And then the nation starts to grow in importance, and we're just not thinking about that. We're just saying, okay, let's mistrust on the nation. Let's treat it as something we should at distance, and I don't think it is reasonable. And so COVID just helps to unveil something, because everything is working very much at the national level now. We depend on our governments, states, and we are closed.
No, I find this very, very relevant, and I was wondering whether maybe critical theory, this is not my field, I mean the theorization about nations and nationalisms, but I was wondering whether we were stuck thinking that nation as an idea, and that's why I was asking you about the word of construction of the common, because the constructionist idea of nation maybe is not helping, because now we are faced with a nation that is performed. I mean, that it is a material reality. It produces our life. So maybe we need a different theoretical approach to think about nation, and that is something that we need right now.
Yeah, well, this is the discussion about the nation, and I think we have to think about it. My talk is just to say, look, we have to think about this, and we have to find some ways to approach these problems, because we haven't been approaching them as we should have approached them. And I said at the end of my talk that these challenges demand humility, and so I haven't thought about how to solve it, but I know that there is a problem there, But just one thing, when I say about, when I use the word construction, it's not, well, maybe not a constructivist approach. I could have said production of the common, but the common, not the nation, but the common must be produced, and it's politically produced. It is socially, politically, and existentially produced. So it is produced, constructed, maybe it has too much a constructive, brings a constructive idea, but I mean, theoretically, but it must be produced. And what I'm saying is that the nation is one of these threads with which we have to count on when thinking about how the common might be produced. The notion, the idea of the common should be produced.
Yeah. Well, I have more questions. Just want to say, if someone wants to post a question in Spanish or Portuguese, please go ahead. I can translate or try to translate it for Kathya. Yeah, I was wondering about I found it very interesting, your how would I say, like statement on individuals and on the individual, and how critical theory has been, in a way, not just critical, but also like avoiding or neglecting the importance of the individual. And yeah, I think that for psychology, this is a very important thing, because we are, of course, or we can say that from some perspectives, that as a discipline, psychology is in a way a discipline that has produced an idea of the individual, and critical psychologists that has criticized that idea of individual as something that mislead us, in a way, in understanding some psychological phenomena, and specifically, maybe, yeah. So this has been like a huge, I would say, debate for decades, and it's a relevant debate. So I was wondering if, yeah, the relationship between individuals and subjectivities, because of course, individuals as the starting point of the collective is one thing, but understanding the individual as the starting point of for example, psychological experience, psychological processes, and etc., is not so straightforward. It has many different implications, as, for example, suffering is something that is up to you, it's individual. Competencies, I mean, educational, but also laboral competencies are individuals, so it's up to you, and etc., etc. So I was wondering if it's useful for your reflection to differentiate socially originated or socially articulated subjectivities and individuals, because individuals as a starting point of the collective has to be recognized as social articulated subjectivities, in a way. Otherwise, we risk, again, the reification of many social processes in the individual. I'm not sure if I'm making myself understood.
Well, it's a very broad field, these are the discussions about the individual, and I think there are different traditions in psychology and social sciences, but let me put it this way. Also in social sciences, there are at least two ways of thinking about the individuals, at least many, but let's say two ways of thinking about the individual. One is to think the individual as isolated, as a unicity, isolated unity. But then there are other theories that think that an individual is an outcome of interdependence. So when you say individual, you're not leaving out the fact that of interdependence, or the idea of interdependence. You cannot think an individual outside its interdependence. So I think this is the idea of the individual as monadic. Yeah, I don't know if the word I'm bringing it from Spanish, but as a monadic unity. I think this is not very interesting, but the individual as an outcome of interdependence, I think it is worth to think it from this perspective. Now, one thing that has happened in the discussion about the individual is that when we say individual, normally we think about how Central Western countries have built an imaginary about the individual that is autonomy and that is rationality. But today in the social sciences, and since some years ago, maybe a decade or more, there is a big discussion about this thing, about how you cannot reduce individual to this Central Western imaginary. And there are a lot of works, not only in Latin America or Asia, but also, also in Europe itself, or rethinking about the idea of the individual. And rethinking the idea of the individual means that we have to in social sciences, we have to think that there is this empirical unity. Now, society is the result of a lot of empirical unities, but every society has a version of what this empirical unity is, and this is an individual. What this empirical unity, but this empirical unity is not alone in the world. It is the result or the outcome of the interdependences and how these interdependences are figured in this specific society. So when I'm talking about the individual now, I am just saying that for people, persons in society, there is a processes of individualization, which means that people are allowed now, because of social reasons, and since some I don't know, maybe some decades ago with a lot of strength, they are allowed, and they are not only allowed, but they have the mandate of showing their individualities, of showing how singular they are, to show their singularities. They are allowed and pushed to both things at the same time. But on the other side, that means that people have a bigger conscience of their autonomy, of their individuality, of their freedom, of their capacity to decide things for themselves. And all these processes, they come from a long time ago, but they have radicalized in Europe and the United States, but they have expanded to other regions now. But all these changes pose a big challenge. That is, you have to coordinate actions. You have to work together, and then somebody must have a little more authority than the other, and you have to have some compliances with norms. But so you have this problem that people are growing, are more individualized, have this idea of themselves, this idea, and at the same time, we have huge collective problems that need as answer forms of coordination, very efficient form of coordination, like the pandemics now, COVID-19. We have to coordinate our conducts. We have to coordinate what we do, how we do, when we do, etc. We have to really change our habits, and we have to change the ways we conduct with others and in the world. And that all means we really have to have some influence in people. But people are now in these societies are people that are individualized. More and more individualized. So you cannot do what you did when it was World War II. I mean, okay, you have to go to the war, and that is it. And you have to roll to the army, and that is it. And that is, and the nations could say, look, this is for the well-being of the nation, so you have to die because of the well-being of the nation. And millions of people did that. And we are not anymore in such a world. So we have to find some way out of that. And because it has to do with regulation, we have to find some way to solve this problem we have. But we will not solve it if we always think that the individual is that. Individual is isolated, individual is egoistic, individual is non-collective. If we start by thinking that that is the individual, then we cannot face what we have to face, because who are you going to appeal to? I mean, who are you appealing to? You cannot appeal to the same people that went to World War I or World War II. These are not the same persons we have. We are not the same persons. We are not the same individuals. I mean, so you have to find new ways, but you have to think about that. And you don't get to think that if you start from the premise that individuals are a threat and individuals are selfish, and I mean individualized individuals, because we are not going to go back from this. We don't have a way back from these individualization processes. We don't. So we have to see it from another perspective.
Very interesting. We have a question from Camila. She says, considering the predictive role of social science, what crisis can we expect in the future, considering that after flattening the curve, many countries are returning to the same system of life that has already begun to collapse?
Well, it is hard to predict. There are some people that are more optimistic about the capacity of predicting, but I think prediction is not only is not only based on what social sciences have worked until now, but what other sciences or disciplines are giving us as input. And I think there will come a lot of other the crisis, and it's not because I think it, because we can read it everywhere. Climate change will bring some new crisis. We know that, but so I cannot predict exactly which, but other disciplines are showing us and are discussing, many researchers and many scientists are discussing that they are coming. But what I would like to say is that Camila is right. We are not going to change the world from one moment to the other. After the end of the pandemics, the transition will go on, And I guess this transition will not take, and this is something that in another field, Wolfgang Streeck, this economy sociologist, German economy sociology, calls has also posed that this transition may take decades. It is not a very quick change, because this is a structural transition. It might take decades, and it will take this. It will take. We have to dispute this transition, and I don't think it will. The world will change from one day to the other, and not only because there are a lot of people that want it to change, but it is very difficult to change ways of life, ways of production, ways to solve the way we solve, I don't know, the distribution of goods, the styles of lives, etc. We have to begin with, but it will take a long time. Well, it's not only me, it's everybody saying that very, very, very quick change is unthinkable.
Okay, Kathya, I think we are just going to end here. I just want to thank you for your thoughts. They have been very, very thoughtful and critical. And I think that we need that as critical theorists, psychologists, social theorists, or etc. We very much need to be critical, and it's difficult. It's not so easy. So I really, really thank you for your thoughts. And thank you everyone who joined us today. And we hope to continue thinking together for these days that still are left in the conference. So thank you very much. And
thanks to you. Just a word. I think we have a lot of work before us, and I think to be critical with our own work is the best way to start.
Yeah.
With it. So thank you very much for the invitation and the conversation, Antonia. I've enjoyed it.